Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the truth seeker show where we examine important issues that are either ignored or misrepresented in the mainstream media. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we're going to dissect, pick apart, look at that very familiar term waking up used in the truth seekers community with the act of genuinely gaining knowledge. So we're all very familiar with this term waking up, which is generally used to describe moving into a state of greater awareness from a state of lesser awareness. There's also the related term woke, of course, this trendy new woke community. And, this is basically referring to social awareness, an alleged increase in social awareness that is arguably just sort of following the mainstream media's lead and jumping on another bandwagon. And there's also the idea of a spiritual awakening, of course, which uses the same idea of moving into a state of greater awareness. So I want to suggest to you that this metaphor has serious limitations. And what are the deeper implications, that are absorbed subconsciously by likening an increase in conscious awareness to the literal action of simply waking up? Is it really helpful? And if so, why? And if not, why? The metaphor of waking up is often used to imply that everything will be okay. It's used in association with the idea of a mass awakening, in which case everything's going to be fine. It's okay. Everyone's waking up. It also has connotations, of course, of waking up out of the dream state, out of a nightmare, and finding that everything in reality is okay. But what are we really looking at in reality when we see people becoming more aware? They've basically achieved some new insight or insights which have been integrated into the sum of their knowledge and given them a more complete mental map of reality, you could say. There is always the possibility, of course, that their claim to knowledge is just a pretense and they don't actually know, they're just repeating something. And of course, there's the possibility that the information that they're claiming to be enlightened by could be wrong, it could be false, it could be not true. But the purpose of this video is to suggest caution when we compare metaphorically a very simple action of moving out of the sleep state with the complex, deliberate and ongoing process of thought that's required for gaining genuine knowledge, conceptual knowledge, and this being what distinguishes the state of unawareness from the state of a more comprehensive awareness or a broader awareness. I would suggest that this metaphor is unhelpful at best, and when we really dig deeper, I think it's counterproductive. And I'm going to share with you all of the reasons why as we dig into it. But first of all, let's look at the reasons, broadly speaking, why this is a counterproductive idea. The first reason that this metaphor is counterproductive is that it fosters an incorrect understanding of what's really happening when someone is becoming aware. And I shall go into this and explain precisely why. The second reason is that it undermines and disvalues the huge effort required and the achievement of gaining real knowledge and of engaging in the process of learning in an ongoing way. The third reason is that it's a dead end that effectively goes nowhere. The metaphor stops you in your tracks by implying that you've achieved your goal, whereas genuinely acquiring knowledge, of course, is an endless journey. And the fourth reason is that it's an implicit call to inaction. By over-congratulating the simple achievement of consciousness as we emerge from the sleep state, the metaphor implicitly turns the mere starting point of gaining knowledge into this end game. It's like the result. I've done it. I've achieved it. Game over. I'm awake. And this is an implicit call to inaction. And it's important to emphasize that this is implicit. It's unspoken. It's taken as read. It's an idea that sort of slipped into your mind without you noticing it, unless you're really thinking hard about these ideas. But it makes it into your subconscious all the same, and you may not even be aware of why you don't feel particularly motivated to do anything. But if you're carrying around this idea that there's a mass awakening going on, or we're entering the photon belt, or some other mystical idea that it's all going to be okay, then you are implicitly going to sit back and feel that there's nothing that you need to do. Take a ringside seat and watch the show. It's important to remember that in any claim of knowledge, the proof is in explanation. And if you or somebody else can't explain their claim or why it's true, then it's basically just a belief. Without clear, reasoned explanation, you really only have a hollow assertion, and you don't have genuine knowledge. The way to prove that you have knowledge is to be able to explain it, from first principles, from the ground up. It's also worth mentioning that if we're serious about being truth seekers, we need to be very conscious, or we need to become conscious of what ideas are genuinely our own, and which conclusions, ideas that we don't know the justification for, have just sort of effectively been slipped into our mind through listening to the mainstream narrative. Ideas we've adopted, we've absorbed by osmosis, you could say, without really having a genuine understanding. And I would suggest, as serious truth seekers, we need to sift through our conclusions and really evaluate which ones are our own. Because this idea of mind control, we hear a lot of people talking about mind control, and yes, there is a lot of mind control going on. People are led to all sorts of conclusions. It's important to know that the main defense, the only defense against mind control, is to be in the driver's seat of your own mind. Get in there and analyze all your own conclusions and your beliefs. And of course, this entails being able to explain things and being able to claim possession of genuine knowledge. So let's compare the action of waking up with the action of gaining knowledge. To start with, waking up is automatic, gaining knowledge is not. Secondly, you don't have to want to wake up, but you do have to want to gain knowledge. Thirdly, waking up doesn't require any effort. Gaining knowledge, on the other hand, does require effort. Waking up doesn't require any specific action. It's just something that just happens when you've had enough sleep. Gaining knowledge, on the other hand, very much does require specific action. Fifth, waking up is almost certain, barring extreme exceptions such as death in sleep. Everyone eventually wakes up. It's a certainty. On the other hand, gaining knowledge is very, very far from certain. We can make errors in our reasoning. All sorts of things can go wrong. We can start with false premises. It's not a certainty. Knowledge is an achievement. Number 6, waking up is inevitable. Again, barring exceptional circumstances, everyone wakes up. Not everyone gains knowledge and therefore awareness. 7, being awake or asleep is binary. It's like a light switch, on or off, awake or asleep. Gaining knowledge, on the other hand, is on an endless increasing sliding scale. From a baby starting off with zero knowledge at birth to as much knowledge as we can acquire at the end of our lives. Obviously, we can't know everything, but it's a genuinely an increasing sliding scale, always increasing one's awareness. Number 8 is that the end game of waking up is only the starting point of gaining knowledge. So the metaphor of waking up gives you this idea that you've arrived, you've done it, success, game over. But in fact, you're only actually in the starting gate for gaining of knowledge. The newborn baby is conscious, it's awake, but as yet it doesn't know anything. So the metaphor of waking up illustrates an effortless, automatic and inevitable increase in conscious awareness, which really doesn't bear any relation to reality of what happens. That's not how we become more aware. So what is it that's really involved in our increasing our conscious awareness? If it's not inevitable and it does require specific actions, what exactly are these things? What's involved? So increased conscious awareness for human beings can only be achieved on the conceptual level by the action of gaining knowledge. And this is, if it both refers to knowledge of the external world and also knowledge of the internal world, our own mental operations and processes, becoming conscious of them, honing them, correcting them, etc., etc., and learning how to use our consciousness effectively and efficiently to gain what we can consider knowledge, which is knowing something beyond any reasonable doubt. So what is knowledge and how do we achieve it? Well, the best definition that I have found for knowledge is this: knowledge is the correct identification of some aspect or aspects of reality in conceptual form. So let's take a look at what's actually required to gain knowledge. Firstly, and we've touched on this already, acquiring knowledge is volitional. You have to want to do it. It doesn't happen automatically. We have to exercise our free will and choose to do it. Acquiring knowledge requires the conviction that knowledge is possible, that gaining knowledge is possible. It should be fairly obvious, of course, that nobody pursues a goal that they consider to be impossible. Very few people attempt to fly by flapping their wings, of course, because we all grasp that we're land-based beings and we don't bother doing that. So you don't bother trying to do something unless you're convinced that it's possible. And these days, there's a widespread idea that knowledge is impossible, you can't know anything. And this is not true, of course. But you have to believe that knowledge is possible in order to remain motivated to actually acquire it. Acquiring knowledge requires the ability to think conceptually. We need to move beyond the identification of individual concretes, the identification of the basic facts of reality in front of you. We have to move beyond that, although those things can constitute basic knowledge, of course. But we in order to understand the world we live in and sort of have an understanding of the broader world beyond our front door, we have to move beyond this grasping of concretes, this identification of things, and see patterns. We have to see principles. We have to be able to see implications and to think long term. Acquiring knowledge requires psychological independence. Now, this means the ability to stand alone amongst the crowd, holding on to your convictions. As mentioned previously, be understanding why what you hold as true is true and being able to explain it. And the acid test of this would be, to be amongst, 2 or 3 people or a group of people who have opposing views, and to be able to confidently, not necessarily being an aggressive truth teller, but just to be able to confidently and rationally explain your point of view in the face of everybody else around you potentially disagreeing with you. And this requires a fair amount of self-confidence and psychological independence. So acquiring knowledge also requires a process of reasoning with logic as the method, and it requires an implicit recognition that reason is the only means to acquire knowledge, that process of rational argument, deduction, inference, etc. Gaining knowledge or acquiring knowledge also requires thinking over and above emotions or feeling things. This is a very important point to grasp. Most people that have given up on the idea of thinking, which is very widespread these days, they will resort to their feelings, as well as, of course, consulting the group, and that's basically following the mainstream media. So it's very, very important to understand that your feelings are not tools of cognition. They don't give you evidence of the facts of reality. Because, for example, different people can feel differently about the same event or the same things. So this is very, very important to grasp. Also, acquiring knowledge requires the use of reason over and above the use of faith. Faith, of course, being believing in things without reasons. It's the negation of reason. It's the idea or the belief that reasons aren't necessary. You just believe. And of course, this is central to all of the religions, having faith in God and what he tells you to do. You cannot use belief in the absence of evidence, or even in contradiction to the evidence, which often happens with people who are predisposed to use faith. So if we dig a little deeper, we find that there are 2 basic ways that the mind works to provide us with knowledge. First of all, perception or perceiving. And knowledge basically begins with perceiving the given, with our senses. We gather the raw data and the empirical evidence from the world around us. So this can be as simple as looking outside the window to see if the sun is shining or not, or studying a petri dish to make observations in a scientific experiment. We use our senses to consult reality to gather the raw data. But it's very important to note that our senses can't be turned up. You can't hear more or see more or feel more. Either our senses are fully functional or they're not. Obviously, some people's sense of eyesight has diminished, or their sense of hearing is less than it once was. But whatever your level of ability to perceive reality, that's all you've got. You can't crank up the dial and increase your awareness by turning up your ability to sense reality. Your only means to increase your awareness is actually using your conceptual faculty. And this means that it gives you the ability to see more than what's in front of your eyes, and see more than the range of the moment, and to be able to think long term. The perceptual is, of course, the vital first step, but to be stuck in the perceptual means to be concrete bound. You may have heard this term, concrete bound, and it's a tendency to only consider the immediately obvious, the stuff that's around you, and a lack of ability to spot implications, to see long term, and to see conceptual ideas that are very remote from us. All the political world and economics and all of these things are very remote from our immediate experience, and we need to get out of the perceptual level and into the conceptual level to really increase our knowledge in these areas. So the other method that we have is conception, or conceptualizing. And it is our conceptual faculty that enables us to truly gain knowledge of this complex world we live in, way beyond our own front door. So the important point to get here is that it's not just about gathering information using perception. It's also about programming, or gaining knowledge, I should say, is also about programming our consciousness, our mind, with appropriate premises. As we mentioned earlier, that reality is an objective absolute, that you must think rather than feel, etc., etc., that knowledge is possible. And it's also our ability to conceptualize that gives us the ability to abstract, to make generalizations, observe principles, and integrate connections between seemingly disconnected ideas. Conceptual thinking is what enables us to spot implications, to extrapolate, and to sort of predict likely outcomes. Ultimately, reality out there, everything outside of us, including us, is an integrated whole that's not contradicting itself. And it's an integrated sum, if you like. And our mental map of reality must correlate with it. For our mental map to be meaningful, it must match the real terrain out there. So the mental map inside, your mind and your knowledge, which is your mental map of reality, must correlate with the real world outside. And the method to do this is to continuously alternate between perception, between gathering information, which is identification, and conception, between observing things and then conceptualizing and using our conceptual faculty to integrate all of these ideas as mentioned. So the takeaway point here is that gaining knowledge is a very complex process that isn't remotely automatic, inevitable, or effortless. So the bottom line is it's not at all like waking up. Waking up or achieving consciousness means that you're in the starting gate for the long, lifelong process of gaining knowledge. So, by way of summary, many people simply believe in things these days. The vast majority hear things in the news or from their friends and neighbours, and they choose what to believe in, and most of the time they'll go with what the majority of everybody else believes in. Very few people these days hold convictions and genuinely possess knowledge. And this extends even into the so-called awake community, the awakened or the woke. And the vast majority, well, maybe not the vast majority, but a very significant number of so-called awakened people are simply believers that are on an alternative bandwagon. And you know, I've noticed this by actually asking people that hold very contrary views to the mainstream in very controversial areas. Why is it that you believe that? Why do you think that? And the answers that you get reveal the fact that these people aren't really thinkers, that they're followers. And again, this means that if we're content to just choose beliefs, we're very, very susceptible to this idea of mind control, which is basically just sowing conclusions in the minds of non-thinking people. So the vast majority of people really don't possess genuine knowledge that they can explain with a rational and logical argument, even in this so-called awakened community. Some say, oh, we must wake more people up, with the implication that it's as simple as sort of shaking them by the shoulders or something like that. If we wake more people up, everything will be okay. And others say, oh, it's okay because people are waking up. There's a mass awakening going on, and as a result of that, it's okay. There's nothing to do. It's kind of a very reassuring and comforting idea. But in reality, for the condition that we call freedom to exist, that condition that is fast diminishing these days, and therefore freedom has to exist for peace and abundance to be possible. For peace, freedom and abundance, for the wonderful world that could be possible, it is possible, and that's where we all want to go. For that to be possible, far, far more individuals have to adopt a lifelong habit of gaining knowledge, of gaining genuine knowledge, understanding things, and being able to explain it, and not just sitting back on laurels considering themselves awake. They have to increase their conceptual awareness. So it's pretty easy to see that a massive change is required in our culture. Specifically, we need to see the widespread adoption of this lifelong habit of self-education, of finding out, of wanting to know and seeking to understand. And this condition should be normal for fully functional human beings. This is the correct state. This is the functioning of a human consciousness. It should be doing this because it's our means of survival. With issues today, with experimental medical treatments that people are being hugely encouraged to take, it's so important. Our thinking for ourselves, our gaining genuine knowledge, not just picking up on the hearsay, on the narrative. It really is our means of survival, and that cannot be overstressed, overemphasized. So rather than waking people up, we need to try and increase conscious awareness by gaining knowledge. And we all need to do this. We need to set the example to those around us by doing it, and we need to encourage others at the same time. And if this practice of acquiring knowledge, really caught on, who knows? One day we might all live in peace, freedom, abundance, and that wonderful world that we all dream of. But at the moment, I think it's probably fair to say that we're quite a long way from that. So this metaphor of waking up, I shy away from using it for all the reasons that I've mentioned in the podcast today. It's really about rational thinking and the acquisition of knowledge. And the danger of using this metaphor is ultimately that it's a dead end and a call to inaction. So I hope you've found this helpful. As always, please comment in the comment section below and hit the like button if you've enjoyed this video. As always, I do encourage you to visit the website lawfulrebel.com. There's loads more there on truth, how to find truth, etc., etc. So thank you very much for listening, and do join me again next time for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
Change you want to see.